Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 219. We are coming to the end of the day of Shiva Tammuz Nidche, the end of the 18th of Tammuz, due to the fact that the 17th of Tammuz was on Shabbos. So the fast day is postponed to Sunday. And we're now closing the last hours here in New York of this fast. Someone asked me earlier today whether I would be doing a program tonight due to the fact that it's the fast day. I said, on the contrary, what do we learn from the Rebbe? That the Rebbe spoke divrei kfushin, words of inspiration, words of Chassidus, beginning in Tov Shin Lamed Ches, the year of the heart attack. The Rebbe added something into his repertoire, which was on Asara B'Teves that year. He spoke actually twice. The evening of Asara B'Teves and the day of Asara B'Teves, he called it divrei kfushin, renewing the custom that was once done in communities, the custom of speaking words of inspiration on this solemn day, on this day which is called a Yom Rotzen L'Hashem, a Eis Rotzen, special opportunity, a special day of where doors are open and the windows are open of opportunity, even though it is a sad day. But it is also a Yom Rotzen, Eis Rotzen L'Hashem. And it's our fasting and the other things that we do, and the prayers and the other things we do on a fast day that actually opens up new channels of blessings, which we'll talk about in a moment. And from then on, in Tov Shin Lamed Ches, in that year, 1978, the Rebbe began speaking every of the fast days. Of course, not a Yom Kippur, but the other days, the fast days, and also not Tisha B'Av, except in Tov Shin Nun Aleph was the only time the Rebbe spoke on Tisha B'Av. The Rebbe would speak the divrei kfushin. So, following the Rebbe's spirit, obviously, since my life is scheduled for Sunday evenings, how could we not be having a program and talking about the significance of the day and other things that matter and are relevant to us? So here we have it. As we conclude this day, we are concluding with a better way to end a day like this than teaching and learning some Chassidus and applying it to our personal lives. So what has the Rebbe said about Shiva Tammuz in general, and specifically this kviyas, this schedule? So there's the famous sikha of Shiva Tammuz. This was the same kviyas was Tov Shin Nun Aleph in 1991. And the Rebbe spoke on that Shabbos. He spoke about this. And he spoke about the inyan of Nidche. So what do we find in the Gemara? The Gemara in Migdal says, regarding Tisha B'Av, that when Tisha falls out on Shabbos, you postpone it, because there are other things that are, for example, when it comes to Purim, you proceed. You don't postpone it to Sunday, you move it to Thursday. Talking about Tanya and so on. The reading of the Megillah. But Tisha B'Av, you push off to Sunday. So the Gemara talks about this and says that there was even a consideration to push it off entirely. And it's cited there, the words of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rebbe, who the author of the Mishnah, the compiler and author of the Mishnah, that was considered and brought up the thought that when a Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, kiven di itche, since it was pushed off already, postponed already, let it be postponed completely for that year. But the Chachamim disagreed with him, and therefore Tisha B'Av we only postpone it and we don't cancel it entirely. But the fact that there's such a havamin in the Gemara, that there is such an opinion, means that there's value to it. What was the consideration? So the Rebbe explained that. Tov Shin Nun Aleph, this would be exactly 27 years ago, that the whole idea of a fast is not an end in itself. I said before, it's a Eis Rotzen, it's a Yom Rotzen L'Hashem. The reason that we fast, as the Rambam says, is because sad events happened, and it's cruel and insensitive not to pay attention to them and do some introspection, look into our hearts and souls and what we can do to improve our lives and correct the causes that brought that destruction. In this case, we have the fasts around, we have Asara B'Teves, but here we're talking about the 17th of Tammuz, and then the Tisha B'Av. But the point of the whole fast is what? As the Rambam concludes in the laws of fasting, that Yohavchi Yomim Melu, l'sasin l'simcha l'moedim tevim, that these days should be transformed to days of joy and delight and holidays. Why? Because the real inner purpose is no such thing as an end only being negative. It's meant for us to have introspection. So in order to do tshuva and return and do what we have to do to repair and build a better world and better lives. So the real inner kavanah, the panemius really is, as the Rebbe cites when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, that Yovei Ariel b'Chedesh Ariel v'Yivne v'Yachriv Ariel. It's talking there about that Ariel, Nebuchadnezzar came and the month of Ariel, the month of Aryeh, Leo, the sign, and destroyed Ariel, the Beis Hamikdash. Almanas from the Alkut Shmeni he brings. Almanas means on condition that Yovei Ariel, that there will come the day that the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi will be rebuilt in the month of Aryeh, by Mashiach. So the whole purpose of the Yerida is Tzedek Aliyah. The descent is in order to bring ascent. The fact that we don't see it right now doesn't mean that's not the case, but that's the purpose. So then Shabbos comes, and Shabbos is of course a day of Tanya. That's why you don't fast. As the Rebbe always explains, when something is not happening on Shabbos, it's not because you push it away, it's because Shabbos replaces, in a positive way, that which would have been done regularly if it was not a Shabbos in a negative way. So when we don't say Tachanun on Shabbos, the same hamshachas, the same things we achieve through Tachanun are done through the positive beauty and pleasure of Shabbos. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh's consideration was, since Shabbos already replaced Shavuos and B'Tammuz, replaced it with a joyous experience the same thing through joy, so you should completely postpone it and cancel it, because the idea has already been achieved, because that's ultimately the goal, that at the end of the day, and when Mashiach comes, it will be transformed to a holiday. So this may be an indicator in a kvias like this. What you see from this, that it's not just a technicality. It's another way of looking at even a negative day, even the sad day, though we're beginning now the 3 weeks, which are traditionally the saddest time of the Jewish calendar, because between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, that's why it's called Ben Hamtzorim, between the boundaries, between the dire straits, the Meitzah of Shiva B'Tammuz, which was when Nebuchadnezzar and then later the Romans surrounded and breached the wall around the Yerushalayim, the wall that surrounded Yerushalayim. And 3 weeks later, the second Meitzar, Mein Hamtzorim, is Tisha B'Av, when they actually burned it down in both temples. There are different opinions about the breaching, as I discussed last week. But there is an opinion that both of them is, therefore it's Bein Hamtzorim, between these dire straits. Saddest time, we don't make weddings, all kinds of limitations and the things we do and the pleasures we do and other elements of our lives. But the kavanah is almanas, as I just cited from the Alkut Shmeni. There's a purpose in it. The purpose is not negative. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And actually the deeper element is yahavchu. We're not just talking about chiyah, pushing off, but transforming the days to be the greatest holidays, because once you tap their energy and their negative energy, and once that is spent and that is harnessed, it actually turns into be the biggest Yom Tov will be Tisha B'Av. That's what it says in another medrash. What that means to us is that even when we're dealing with a negative, where we acknowledge and we're not in denial and we're facing head on something that may have been negative in our lives, we have to always remember that it's a stepping stone to something positive. And there's even a consideration that it should be postponed and cancelled in a certain periods of time when you have like a Shabbos that comes and indicates on the positive element. But the conclusion is no, it's not cancelled. It moves to Sunday, but nevertheless, what moves to Sunday does not mean that you didn't have a taste of that pleasure on Shabbos. The Rebbe speaks about this at length in that Sikhe, Shavuos B'Tammuz, which was Shabbos Parshas Bolok, like it was like this year, Tavshinun Aleph. There's other times that Rebbe had farbrenged on that day when Shabbos was a Shavuos B'Tammuz. There's a very famous farbrenged, Tavshin Chov Daled, 1964. Farbrenged went till very late. So late farbrenged till 8 o'clock. The Rebbe said then to empty all the bottles of mashpia, and said they continued drinking, took off the gzeira till you were able to drink. And many stories about that particular farbrenged, a very deep farbrenged. The Rebbe spoke very big chidushim in Chassidus. As a matter of fact, one of the most fundamental siches in Chelik Vav, Shmois, the second sikh in Shmois about the Taimei Habriya, the reasons for creation, as you see there, is taken from the sikh of Bolok, Shavuos B'Tammuz, Tavshin Chov Dalet. But again, the emphasis being Keit Sam Lacheshach, to put an end to the darkness, Kiven Ditche Nitche Itche. that since it was postponed, let it be cancelled already. That even though it's not the conclusion in halacha, but the bottom line, the consideration is also value and teaches us much about this deeper significance of a day like this. So as we come to the end of the Shavuos, this Shavuos b'Tammuz Nidche, this is the 18th of Tammuz. This is a tremendous lesson, a tremendous opportunity that though we're coming to the end of the fast and we have done what we had to do in the so-called depriving ourselves of the pleasures of meals and drink and all the other limitations that Shavuos b'Tammuz imposes, yet we have to always know Shavuos is Gematria Teiv. Teiv is 17. Tez Vav Beis. 9, 6, and 2 is 17. So really is Teiv Be'etzem. It's fundamentally something that's good. There are things that are good that we see in an open way, and there are things that we have to sometimes work on and go through a process to get through it and then transform it into a greater good. Which explains also, as we'll talk about the 9 days, the idea, the parallel sometimes, the Gemara says the parallel between the 9, the mishnichnas of mamaytim b'simcha to mishnichnas odem marim b'simcha. But we'll talk about that when that period comes. By then, hopefully, Mashiach will come and we'll already experience only the positive. But the lessons, the applied Chassidus lessons are very clear. It's a general outlook of life, that when we see negative things, negative is always a deeper positive. Energy is energy. And even grief and loss and sadness is a deeper energy that's inverted. And when we do the right things and we respect it, and we learn our lessons from it, and we allow it to help us grow, it catapults us into a completely different dimension. As we see people who have gone through pain, through darkness, can reach the dimensions of light that are qualitatively of a completely different paradigm. And this you see in this Gemara, when you understand it, Chassidus, you see the Gemara, this consideration of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, all lies in that word. Since it was postponed, let's already cancel it. For the reasons, as I explained, because that's its true inner purpose, is to cancel and postpone and transform it. Since we're talking about the beginning of the 3 weeks, so the lesson I've just discussed, the 3 weeks, the Rebbe says in another sikh, I believe it was the sikh, 3 weeks of Tafshinun, it could be. Beautiful sikh as well, and the same idea. You see how the Rebbe took the 9 days and the 3 weeks and turned it as much as possible, Pi Halacha and Torah, into days of using it as positive forces in learning Torah, kind mitzvohs, seeing b'mishpat tepada v'shaveh b'tzedakah, which the Novi says is the way we redeem Zion and Yerushalayim is through Torah and through tzedakah, and especially through learning the laws of Hilchos Beis HaBchira, in the Psukim in Yecheskel about the third Beis HaMikdash, the measurements and the entire structure of what the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi will look like, in Masechta Midas, and the Gemara, and Halach, it's Hilchos Beis HaBchira of the Rambam, citing the famous Medrash. Well, now it's famous. That Yecheskel's talking to Hashem and they're talking about the destruction. Yecheskel says, what will I give the people once the temple is destroyed? So Hashem says, teach them, give them, here's the measurements of the third Beis HaMikdash, let them learn that. And Yecheskel says, what's the point of learning it if they can't do anything with it? So the Eibishter says, what do you think? If I took away the Migdash, I'll ever take away truly the Beis HaMikdash from them? I will never really take it away from them. Learning it will be considered even greater than building it. Like we find in different places. When you learn about something, since Torah is the blueprint for existence, so when you study the blueprint, you are essentially studying the blueprint of the creation of that existence. So by studying it, that will actually bring on the actual building. Based on this and other midrashim, the Rebbe emphasized and began Tafshin Lamed Hey and Lamed Vov, and then it was in 1975 and 76, the study of these laws in this time period. So though the laws apply still that it's a 3-week mourning period and all the sadness and so on, but B'kudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Lev, which means that B'kudei Hashem Yisharim Mesamchei Lev, that the B'kudei Hashem, the laws of Hashem, including the Torah of Hashem, bring joy to the Yisharim, to the straight ones, to the righteous ones. So by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs in ways that are allowed, you actually reveal the inner depth and the inner power and the inner positivity of this period in time. So all this emphasizing the transformation. It's interesting because before the Rebbe, you don't find the previous Rebbeim or others really making such an emphasis. So you could say because we're coming to the end of Golus, at the end of Golus we start getting a glimpse and we're getting to the point where will be the transformation. You could say also the other side of things, as the world gets darker, the Rebbe came and brought even more light. But I believe also, on a very basic level, it was a message to all of us who could sometimes feel depressed or feel down due to some negative experiences. No, do what you can in the negative, in a permissible and acceptable way, to transform it. And that will ultimately redeem the 3 weeks and turning them into something very powerful. The Rebbe speaks about why it's called 3 weeks. 3 is chazakah. So you would seem to think, why would you emphasize chazakah? Chazakah means when you do something 3 times, it becomes something permanent. Why would you want to emphasize permanence in the 3 weeks when it's negative? And there again the answer is because the premium, the inner dimension of the 3 weeks is positive. And that's the chazakah, the chizuk that comes from the transformation, the yehovcha yomim elu. So the theme and the message is very clear. I will also want to do some cross-referencing to times I've spoken about this in the past. Episode 74, 170, and 218. And as well, as since this is week of Parsha Pinchas, let's talk about that for a moment. There you also see a transformation. What was Pinchas? Pinchas was a relatively not known person. He was a man of peace, a quiet man. But then he saw a desecration happen. After Bilam could not curse the Jews in last week's Parsha, Balak, he saw that you cannot curse the Jews. He tells Balak, paraphrasing, we cannot do to them anything because God protects them. If you want to hurt them, have them hurt themselves, make them vulnerable. And he was the one that came up with a plot to send the Midianite women to seduce the men in Israel. And that opened them up to being vulnerable. And indeed, Zimri, the story was Zimri and the head of the Shevet Shimon. And what happened was that Pinchas, when he saw Zimri defile and desecrate God's name in public, he killed him. Now, Pinchas was not a man of aggression. Of what blessing does he get? Brisi shalom. Kayin. Hashem says, because kanu es kenesi, because you took up my cause. You avenged my honor. Because of that, you will get the blessing of peace. But his act seems to be not a peaceful one, because it is peace. Because Pinchas was not coming due to aggression. He wasn't an aggressive person. He saw the desecration. And that he could not deal with, and he felt that was necessary to be done without even asking questions. There's only once you hear such a story. But what is the blessing? The blessing of peace, not to ever think that this is acceptable behavior. Because what his intention was peace, but there he transformed a desecration that could have brought, who knows what kind of magefa, it brought plenty of problems. But it could have been worse. And Pinchas being Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, sanctifying God's name, brought Brisi Bris Shalom, my covenant of peace that I give you. Again, a transformation, just like the transformation of the curses of Bilam, commissioned by Balak, was transferred by Yafech, transformed his intended curses to blessings. Here too, Pinchas ended up turning this negative into a positive. Again, the theme of the 3 weeks, as the Shalah says, in general, but he speaks about the 3 weeks, that the Parshas that we read during the 3 weeks have a connection to the period in time when we read them, even though you can say the 3 weeks came later. But the Torah, again, is a blueprint. The Torah is an eternal blueprint that preceded existence, and therefore the energy of these weeks is already hinted to in these Parshas. Then there comes a point in history when the 3 weeks played themselves out, beginning, of course, with the breaking of the tablets on the 17th of Tammuz, which also turns into a positive under the circumstances. After they sinned with the golden calf, Moshe breaks the tablets on the 17th of Tammuz, 3,330 years ago. And as Rashi says at the end of Chumash, Yeshekeicha sheshevarta, thank you for breaking them, because through that he preserved the Jewish people. As Rashi says in Parshat Kisisa, because he tore up the contract, the ksuba, the marriage contract. Yes, the Jews here don't build up false gods, but they didn't sign it. In this case, they didn't receive the tablets. So by breaking the tablets, he actually left an opening to create peace, that ultimately there would be peace and reconciliation when on Yom Kippur. So Shiva B'Tammuz begins the second march up on the mountain, that after 40 days from Shavuos till Shiva B'Tammuz, now comes the next 40 days from Shiva B'Tammuz to Rosh Chodesh Elul, which will not be successful. Then another 40 days from the first day of Elul through Yom Kippur, and then he comes down with the second tablets and receives Salachti Kidvarecha, forgiveness and reconciliation. So you see when you read the story how much more lies there, and the reflection in our lives is very clear. We all have had times where we created a disappointment a betrayal. We may have betrayed ourselves. We may have betrayed others. We may have betrayed our dreams. And there's the feeling that you feel that maybe damaged goods, too late for me. Comes the lessons that we've been talking about. The lessons both from the Nidche, the postponement of Shiva B'Tammuz, as well as the general lesson of the 3 weeks. And ultimately the goal is that the breaking should bring to some greater revelation. The breaking of the tablets led to Moshe's deep love for the Jewish people, which in turn evoked God's deep love, and yes, ultimately forgiveness, and we received a day like Yom Kippur that there's hope, even after darkness. This is in essence the story that we're beginning now with the 3 weeks, leading into the 9 days, and then leading into the 15th of Av, and the Elul, and ultimately the Yom Noraim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, as we'll talk about as we go along. So you've seen our calendar lies itself. Our calendar is a deeply psychological calendar that carries within it all aspects of a person's life, all the levels on the spectrum of life, from the highest high points to the lowest low points, and all part of a larger narrative, a story that unfolds, that when you see it through, you see that even the downs ultimately lead to an up, to a great achievement and a great epiphanies and revelations, as we've been talking about. Okay. Let us now go to make some announcements. Let's start with that. This program is a free program. A lot of work goes into it. Many questions. I just want to give you information. We're around 3 months behind in questions, but we're going to get to all of them. And please do not feel that a question has been ignored. If it hasn't been answered yet, it will be answered in time. So keep your ears open. If you want to know when a program will answer your questions, just email us with your email address so we can respond. It will stay confidential and anonymous. You can write whatever email address, but the place to write questions anonymously and any requests, including if you want to know when a program will be answering your question, go to meaningfullife.com/mylife and you'll find that form. You'll also find there archives of all previous 218 episodes, which are all time-stamped in YouTube, which you can find directly the topic you're looking for. Just search by topic, by keywords, something that you may be interested in, or you know what word or other words that may be connected, then it'll be easy to find. Also, you have there all the essays that have been posted now. This is the 4th year of our essay contest. Tremendous essays that apply Chassidus to contemporary issues. And finally, perhaps the most important point is that we need your support. These programs and all this work is done as a public service, but it is sponsored and made possible through your generosity. So please go to meaningfullife.com/sponsorship and please sponsor a program, a series of programs in honor of a loved one, in memory of a loved one. And we should only have simchas. This is a great way to honor people and of course help us continue doing this work. And in the merit of your sponsorships, so many people will be helped spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and all other ways that we apply Chassidus to our personal lives. Okay. So now let us go. This week is also July 4th. July 4th, we know, is a secular holiday, Independence Day, the day when United States of America declared its independence. So a question is asked, did the Rebbe say anything about July 4th? We know the Rebbe did speak about Thanksgiving, which is another holiday in America, July 4th. So I looked around. I don't recall a direct siche. I think there are a few letters that talks about independence and the independence of this country, but I would like to have your help, please, and your partnership. If you can find anything that you see, whether it's a note from the Rebbe, a letter referring to the July 4th, or for that matter, a siche or any other piece of information on this, please send it in to us, and I will surely address it next week as a follow-up. What I will share is something I recall very vividly. It was the first few weeks I began writing farbrenged formally, the year Tov Shin Mem. It would be 1980, the year when President Reagan became president. Interestingly, corresponding to that, the Rebbe began a series of a new level, I would say, a new dimension of speaking about this country, Malchus Shal Chesed, but in general about Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Neach, the 7 Noahide universal ethical laws, in general, started speaking much more on a global scale, which only accelerated through the 80s. So I remember this was right the Shabbos after Yud Shvat. That year was, of course, Shnas HaShleishim, the Rebbe's 30th year of leadership, which began Tovshin Yud. This is Tovshin Mem, 1950, 1980. So the Rebbe, the farbrenged, was a very monumental farbrenged then, I remember, Yud Shvat. But often, as often would be, sometimes the Shabbos afterwards, and the period afterwards sometimes was even more revolutionary than the actual day. This is not uncommon in the Rebbe's approach. So that Shabbos, Pasha B'Shalach, was a Mededik farbrenged in general. And one of the things that Rebbe spoke about was the United States of America. And the Rebbe said the following. That's one of the first times, I believe, maybe the first time, the Rebbe spoke about what we have on the currency, United American currency, both on coins and on paper bills, on currency, the words "In God we trust," and "E pluribus unum." E pluribus unum is from many one, achdus, which was a central theme in those farbrengeds in that period. The Rebbe said the following. He said that there's a sefer called Urim V'Tumim, sefer. It talks and asks a question that when Rashi or Rambam or other great Torah scholars wrote their chiburim, they wrote their works, their magnum opuses, their monumental works. And today, when we study them, we're medayik, we delve into every detail, their precision, and we learn all kinds of things from that. Were they aware of all these diyukim, all these different lessons or different nuances that we derive from their words? Were they aware of them consciously? So the Urim V'Tumim answers that Miyad Hashem Hiskil, since they wrote it with Yiras Shamayim and completely dedicated to God, so God, in a sense, infused that they should write the right words. So they may not have been conscious directly of what they wrote and understood. They wrote what they wrote, but to say every dig that would be said to the end of time in their words, they were given a certain power that their words would carry that type of precision, divine precision, that we can then be medayik. And it's a famous Gemara that talks about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was listening to the Gemara Torah being learned below, and he hears Rabbi Akiva say a chiddush in the Gemara. He says to Hashem, in Chol Shadaite, he felt weak in a way, he fell down. He says, why'd you give the Torah through me when you hear a person like this saying such chiddushim? Why not give the Torah through him? So Hashem says, listen, continue to listen. So someone asked Rabbi Akiva, Minohan and Milsa, how did you learn this out? So he says, Halacha LaMoshe Messinai. I heard it from Moshe. I heard it in the name of Moshe. It came from Moshe. So it says, Moshe, calm down. The Rebbe explains once in the Sikh, I think Shmini Tovshin Chavhei, I think he said that what Moshe was about personal. No, because he saw the Hota Rebbe. He has a source, Rabbi Akiva. So what's the pshat? Pshat is that the Torah is God's Torah. Moshe, Zichru Teres Moshe Avdi, it's called Teres Moshe because Mokiv Shemasa Nafshaleh gave his life for it. Not because he's a personality, because he's a non-personality. He became a transparent, seamless channel of the Torah. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, the famous diuk. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, he received it from God. Sinai was a mountain, but it was a humble mountain. It was the lowest of mountains. Mochich Mekol Teraya. Moshe Kibel Torah, he received the Torah like a Sinai, like he learned the lesson from Sinai to be humble. Moshe Ya'anov, he was the humblest. So he channeled the Torah. Therefore, the Torah has a lot of it. Moshe consciously was aware of many things. But what he delivered could be meduik, but Rabbi Akiva could reveal something that Moshe himself consciously did not hear or was not aware of. That's why we say, Kol Masha Talmud Vosik Osid L'Chadish, anything that a Talmud, a good Talmud, a devoted student, innovates, Nit L'Moshe Messina, is given to Moshe Messina. So the famous question is, what do you mean? Then it's not a Chiddush. The answer is, because to Moshe was given the klolim, the general principles. And the Torah includes everything. Hafach ba, v'hafach ba, the kula ba. Turn its pages, and you'll find everything. That doesn't mean that everyone learning it sees everything. Even Moshe not necessarily sees it in a revealed way. The Talmud is mechadish, but it's mechadish something that's inside the Torah. The Torah was already given to Moshe. Then Moshe hears it, and he's impressed. It says the same thing about the Rabbeinu Tam. Is brought to say about the Rebbe Tam, a similar idea. So the idea that Urim V'Tumim says, elaborating a bit, is that they were mechaven. They wrote their Pirush, Rashi, Rambam, and so on, And we could today be medayik, even though if they hear the dir, they would not necessarily been aware of it. And now they hear it, they say, and it gives them nachas, because they appreciate it, they realize their pirush was takim mechuvim, but not because they were so smart, but because they were so bottle, because they were so humble. I elaborated a bit more than the Rebbe spoke then b'shala, but what's the negate to July 4th, you may ask? So the Rebbe continued and said, if that's the case with Balei Bchira, people who have free will, complete free will, definitely people without free will or without complete free will, the founding fathers of the United States of America, that God placed in them the idea, the concept of establishing this country and the concepts that are stated in the Declaration of Independence, that all people are created equal and endowed with rights by God. God we trust, e pluribus unum. So even though they may not have used those words, but the principles were were set in motion and put in place on July 4th in 1776. So the Rebbe gave a value that I don't believe I ever heard from the Rebbe before or after. But you understand now the Rebbe's look at the foundation of this country, which would ultimately become a haven, as the Rebbe said many times, for Jews who were escaping their enemies, and ultimately for the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe, and become the center of Lubavitch Chabad, as it moved from Russia, Europe, to this part of the world, to this hemisphere. So you understand a whole different dimension. So July 4th, in that sense, has a certain power. And even though it's a non-Jewish holiday, so to speak, so it's not a holiday that's a part of the Jewish calendar, but it's a holiday that represents, just like when the Rebbe speaks about the UN established in New York and the different sikhs the Rebbe spoke about it, it indicates this day a certain breakthrough that you can even say the Sikh of Vayeshev Tavshinun Beis, when the Rebbe spoke about the change, that in the time of the Alter Rebbe, he was concerned that if France won, it would not be good for the Jews. And that's why he prayed that Alexander of the Tsar of Russia should win, even though Begashmias it would be difficult, oppressive. But Baruchnis, they would be more intact, their integrity would be maintained. You could say the United States of America is a part of the revolution that the Rebbe says there, that today we could come into the Western world, because now it is built on the principles of God. Napoleon was complete individualism, self-made, I am God, the worship of the self. Whereas the United States is built on in God we trust, e pluribus unum, that from the many one, diversity and unity, and the other principles that are based on that are the foundations of the 7 Noahide laws, the laws of ethics of tzedek and yesher, b'loshen Rabbeinu. So July 4th has that message and lesson to us, the confirmation that even from Tachtenim, the lower hemisphere, which is emphasized as being the place where Matan Torah was not begili, that too should come from the bottom up, build and be transformed into a mokum of Torah, a merkaz of Torah, a center of Torah and Chassidus, where the Rabbeim from 1940 on until this very day maintained their center. So July 4th is connected to that, and of course much more can be said about it, and in relation to Chassidus applied, it's the idea that independence is not independence from God, it's independence, we're independent of others. No one can enslave a human being, because there's only one God, and we all serve that one God. And as a result of that, we are endowed with unalienable rights, as the Declaration of Independence states. So it's now became formalized and institutionalized in this country principles that for thousands of years Jews were teaching and learning from Sinai and all the way back from Avram Avinu. What kind of validation is that? Unbelievable validation. As I pointed out a number of times, 2 good books to read if you want more on this topic, on the Jewish influence on this republic, the United States. A book called On Two Wings by Michael Novak, and another book called The Hebrew Republic, and the name of the author is right now slips my tongue. So, but there it discusses the effect of Dafke Judaism and Torah on this country. So in the context of Chassidus, it's obvious that Chassidus does not need endorsement or validation, but yet when you see the principles that have always been taught in Torah, when you see them being embraced by a country, a powerful country like this, a superpower, and from there being exported to so many other countries, and literally changing the world, what does it tell you? It tells you how the principles of Chassidus, of Torah, the principles, the healthy approach of how God wants us to live our lives is infiltrated and is affecting a critical mass and setting the tone and setting the stage for Mashiach's coming, when the entire world will be guided by these principles. As we said in the Haftarah today, that will be based field of the Kol Ha'amim, that Beis HaMikdash will be a house of prayer for all nations. Oz Epech Elamim Sofa Brura, as the Rambam cites in the end of Hilchos Melachim. To a point where it will be Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Le'yam Chasim, a world filled with divine knowledge, as the waters cover the sea. What is divine knowledge? Chassidus. Divine knowledge that teaches us the mysteries of our own beings, of our souls, the mysteries of the cosmos, the way to connect to God and to fulfill God's plan in this world. On a more personal level, what it teaches us is that despite all the challenges, like I spoke before about the 3 weeks, ultimately, despite all the oppression, a country like this was founded a few hundred years ago, and as a result, it has become a beacon. So what is a beacon of justice and virtue? And this doesn't mean it's a perfect country, but the principles are there. So it teaches us all that we all have the capacity to find that inner independence within ourselves. Independence that's based on the fact that we're created in the divine image, and therefore we bow to nothing. No man and no man-made things. Okay. Let us go now to the next question. Completely different category. I will mention episode 169 regarding July 4th. I spoke there about independence, so there's more to discuss. It's in episode 169. Here's the next question, completely different category. Can we establish policy based on a Chassidishe Hergesh? Let's define first a Chassidishe Hergesh. A Chassidishe Hergesh means a feeling, a Chassidic feeling, a gut feeling of what a chassid should do. So it may not be something specifically stated or specifically guided, but you just have a chush, a sense, like a gut instinct. Now this question is coming and following up my discussion last week in episode 218 about Ziyah. The title on the Rebbe. So I discussed the different arguments made on this topic, and basically saying, yes, there's definitely a hergish that people have, that they feel the Rebbe lives on. We're not talking about crazy stuff now. We're talking about the Rebbe living on, Mazare B'chaim. Things that the Rebbe said about the Frierdiker Rebbe for sure applied to himself. Living on through his students, living on through his Teira and Oved, because, like he says in Ageres HaKedah, Shishtakich Yatir, because now he's not bound by a physical body, since his life, Tzaddik's life, is not a life of flesh, but Chaim Psari, but a life of Ruchnias, which is Avavir and Amunah, love, awe, and faith, that lives on, especially when his students and his disciples and his children perpetuate that legacy. Without going into all the different discussions. On the other hand, the fact is that Rebbe did write the titles on the Frierdiker Rebbe when he published things, and which is, you could say, the responsible thing to do, because that's what you formally have to do in halacha. So the question came up, okay, so you made a case for a hergish, but can we make policy based on a hergish? And of course, this broadens now much more than just giving titles and what to do. It's a broader question. We have many hergeshim. Now, both sides of the argument would be a hergish is a very powerful thing. So why should you not build policy on it? On the other hand, however, a hergish is a hergish for a reason. It's a feeling. This is what it says in Teira Shebiksav, and there's Teira Shebal Peh, and then there's Minig Yisrael. So we have things that say in Teira, written Teira, in the oral Teira. There's customs. A hergish is not in those categories. So the answer has to unequivocally be, no, you cannot establish policy based on a hergish. First of all, by definition, a hergish is a personal feeling. My personal feeling. So how can I establish policy for somebody else based on my feeling? I may do certain things based on that feeling. I have to still, even that needs to be checked, and a reality check, and make sure that it's not just Tamavilda feeling. Because remember, feelings are very powerful when they're accurate. But when they're not accurate, you can become completely off course, off the reservation. So hergeshim, you don't begin Chassidus and Teira based on hergeshim. First, you know what it says. You know the interpretation. You know that there are things that are a mitzvah to do. You know things that are forbidden to do. Then you have things reshus. Reshus means it's neutral. You could use it this way, you could use it that way. Let's say you have a hergish for a certain thing. It's not a mitzvah, it's not awesome. How do you know it's a right Hergesh? How do you know? How are you so sure? We're all subjective. Maybe it's due to some blind spot. Maybe it's due to a distortion. That's why Hergeshim have to be checked. You have to have an objective person, a mashpia. And you ask the mashpia. I find a lot of people are very Chassidishe people. They have very deep Hergeshim. But their arrogance, God forbid, and their self-righteousness is like they really know. I know. They may not even say it because it's not so smart to say it. But how do you know? Maybe you make a mistake. And I speak to myself as well. I'm saying to all of us. How do you know? So that's even if you act on your own. To make a policy out of it. There, how could you make a policy based on your Hergesh? And it's very important to know this. I heard the Rebbe once say, I can't find the source for it, but I just remember it. Maybe someone listening can point out where the source for it is. He once said, Divos ul machen, von Teire Shabal Peh, Teire Shabiksav, will sof kol sof machen, von Teire Shabiksav, Teire Shabal Peh. Those that make for an oral interpretation of the Torah, written Torah, will ultimately make the written Torah oral interpretation. In other words, it's true that they all have authority. Say the written Torah has its authority. Oral Torah, chvivan alai divrei sofrim. It says it should be precious to more than divrei Torah. But don't think that means it's more authority. It means because it was written by the Rabbanim and by the Chazal, and it's not written, there should be a chvivus yiseda because it's coming from the, you can say, the interpretation of our Rebbes. But to say a Rabbanim has more chumrah than a daraisa, chaz v'shalom. A minig Yisrael, Terehu, has sometimes even more chvivus. But not to say that it has more legal authority. Emotionally, a minig Yisrael is much deeper than Teresh Shabal Peh, and Teresh Shabal Peh is much deeper than Teresh Shabiksav. The famous example that Rebbe gives, 3 levels of bitla, 3 levels of ahava, love. One is the person who loves you asks you to do something. So you do it even if it's inconvenient. Second, he doesn't ask you, he only hints, remez. So you don't make believe like you didn't hear it. Even a hint alludes to it, you also do it. And the third is, you don't hear a directive, you don't hear a request, you don't even hear an allusion to a request, and you anticipate, what would my beloved enjoy? And you do it on your own, without any expectation. The Rebbe said, the first is Teresh Shabiksav. Hashem asked us to do things. He wrote it. The second is Lekem Midad Mizabaraisa. Nothing in the Teresh Shabal Peh is not hinted to, but it's hinted. You could say, I don't even know, I can't, it's not so clear, and not have the same commitment. So that's even a deeper love, because it means you're not even waiting for, not only you'll do what was asked, but even things alluded to you're going to do. That's chavivit. And then there's minig Yisrael. Minig Yisrael, it's not in the written Torah, it's not in the oral Torah. Eden, throughout Golus, anticipated what would give God simcha. And that's the deepest one, because it's coming completely from you. And the dogma for that is Simchas Torah. Simchas Haragolim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos is min hadaraisa. Simchas Beis HaSheva is the Rabbanim. And it has that strength. Simchas Torah doesn't say anywhere, it's a hinted to here and there, but it's not even a remez. But when Tanzman, Simchas Torah. So that's a Hergesh, but that's mitzad Hergesh. That's not mitzad Chiyuv. It's a very big difference. Policy is made by what it says in the Torah. We have a constitution. We have laws. We have Teresh Shabal Peh, Teresh B'Pirusha Nitna. Teresh was given with his commentary. Yes, and we have Minog Yisrael that became part of the canon, meaning part of our doctrine. But someone should come make it from a Hergesh, a Minog Yisrael for others. And doctrine, where do you get the yisod of that? Even for yourself, as I said, you also need your checks and balances. So that's, I think, a critical thing to remember and always know. And I also refer you to episode 92, where I spoke about Chassidishe Hergesh as well. So I hope that's enough, and let's go to the next question. As you see, these are questions that came up due to last week's program, but the next one is one that's been sitting in the inbox, and I'll finally get to it now. So here's the question. As converts, we feel isolated in our community and can't find a mashpia. What can and should we do? And here's the written out, detailed question. Hello, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please, if you read this on your class, please withdraw my personal information and locations, which I am doing. Thank you for your commitment to spreading Chassidus in the name of the Rebbe. I have enjoyed your podcast, YouTube classes, and your book. I am not sure if you have time for this, but I'm reaching out as I'm not sure who to turn to and you say you will answer every question. A brief background on my journey. My wife, my 6 children, and myself converted last year. It has been a huge change for us leaving our small country town and moving to the city to be part of the Jewish community and the shul. The excitement and challenge of getting through the process seems to have waned. Now we are feeling more isolated than ever. The community we live in is not religious and more traditional, and we have taken on Chabad minig, which seems to be more and more harder as time goes on, as those around us seem to be more relaxed. Both my wife and I do not have mashpiyim. I've tried to find someone to connect with, but cannot find someone to confide in. The rabbi and rebbetzin are too busy for us. It feels like we have converted and now are on our own. There are 3 other Chabadnik families here, including the rabbi and rebbetzin. My questions: how do we find mashpiyim? I understand that for someone to be a mashpia, they should be someone that will hear you and guide you, someone that you can look up to and sets an example. Should we leave and move to a more religious community, or is it like this everywhere? Do they need to be someone who you see face to face? I'm not even sure what to expect from a mashpia, sincerely. Okay, so my response, based on the information you've given me, and I always qualify this by saying I don't have all the information, there would definitely be a few questions I would ask to get more information before fully responding, but I'll just respond based on what I see here. Number 1, why not move? If it's a community that just has a few people and you're converts, and I'm assuming, of course, that the conversion was done halachically and with the proper rabbis and proper guidance and direction, and you have a family to bring up, your family alone outnumbers your community. Why not go into a strong community where you can have role models, where you could have support, where you could have community and social life? Why be in a place like this? I'm not knocking the place, there may be good things, but based on the fact that you just converted last year, even though conversion comes after study and you made a serious commitment, and I commend you for that, but it's a life of growth. We continue to grow, and if you want to thrive, you need to be in a place where you could thrive. So I would, unless there's strong reason, which I don't see from this note, why don't you consider really moving to a bigger city, and you can explore different options and figure out a place that can be good for your children as well as yourselves and for education purposes and growth and all that comes with it. That would also make it easier to find a mashpia because you'd be in a place where there's more opportunities, more people to reach out to. To force it here is going to be very difficult because you're dealing with just a few individuals. They may have the time, may not have the time. In addition, a good community will also help you stand on your own feet, because that's the real goal here. Even though we all depend on each other and need each other, but you don't want to be completely vulnerable, dependent on everybody else. You need a place where you can feel valued, feel respected, and have that dignity that's necessary in all forms to grow. Or else it's sad to say, but it could also start backfiring and you're getting really hurt and disappointed in the choices you've made, which I don't even want to mention, but I'm mentioning it because it's important to be aware that there are consequences here that need to be preempted. And the first preempting, in my view, would be to move, to be very honest. That's my inclination when I read this, unless I'm missing something and there's something that has not been said. Come to learn as we mature, all of us mature, that when the honeymoon is over, so to speak, yes, we are ultimately on our own, but there are very good people out there. And if you don't find one rabbi or one rebbetzin or one mashpia, there's another one. And never give up. I don't think it can be done long distance. I think what you need is a community support. So that's why, basing on that, I'm basing my response to you. And again, qualifying this based on what I'm reading, without ever meeting, without knowing the details. And for all I know, there's much here that I am not aware of that would have changed the entire conversation. Let's go to the next topic. Another question that's long overdue that came in a while back, and that is this. What can we say to parents who are hurt by their child telling them that a chassid farbrenged with his class and said that not they, the parents, but the Rebbe is his true parent? And here's how the question was posed in detail. A respected Chabad individual farbrenged with Bochrim, how our true parents are the Rebbe and Rebbetzin. A boy at this farbrengen came home and sincerely told his parents that they are no longer his parents. They were deeply hurt. Can you shed some light on this? Yes, indeed, I can. I don't know who this mashpia was, or this, what did you call him? A respected Chabad individual. I was not there, so I'm not going to point a finger. But if indeed he says something like that, it was misunderstood, yes, he carries responsibility for saying something that was not, let's call it, brilliant. Even though, I'll go back to what I discussed before about Chassidishe Hergesh, we'll talk about that in a moment, but as we always know, communication is not about your intentions, it's about the intentions of the recipient. It's not your intentions, but how the recipient receives and takes it. This is a message, a lesson from the Rebbe, time and time again. You could have all the good kavanas, but it's all about how the reader or the listener is going to take it. When you're speaking to boys in yeshiva, for that matter girls, who are impressionable and may not understand all the nuances, be very careful what is said, even if it's all the good intentions, and I'll explain in a moment what he probably meant. Because it could be taken out of context, and a child is simple, comes home and says, "You're not my parent, the Rebbe's my parents." And what do you need that for? And it could be very hurtful, and it could be something that will backfire because the parents may not be necessary in that yeshiva. Maybe they send their child to this yeshiva and then they're hearing these things. They may take the child out of yeshiva. It could be to that extent. It could be damaging. Even if the parents are sensitive and have Chassidishe feelings, they may not understand what was said, and this, because the child didn't really take it the right way. Because I'm sure this mashpia, this Chabad individual, respected Chabad, did not intend that the son should go home and tell his parents that you're not my parents, the Rebbe and the Rebbe's are, and hurt them. I'm confident that that was intention. But Chacham is harabed verechem. Chacham have to be careful what they say because you never know how it's interpreted. Now, what could he have meant? Well, we know by Chassidim, they know some Chassidim say when they don't count their birthday as their birthday, they count the first time they saw the Rebbe as their birthday. But let's be honest. In Hapi Halacha, or not Halacha, the Minhag Yisrael of Yom Haledes, when should you keep them? The Rebbe's Heiros. You can keep them both, but I doubt that the Rebbe would say keep them only when you met the Rebbe first. Because the bottom line is, Alpi Teira, Alpi Halacha, you were born a certain day, there's dinim connected to it, Minhagim connected to it. You have to get an aliyah then. To ignore that Yom Haledes because the Rebbe is, because you feel your real spiritual birth was because the Rebbe, and which has basis, I'll explain in a moment, is why? Why can't you have both? You want to emphasize that? Fine. But we have to remember, Chassidishe Hergesh, Chassidishe Hergesh. Now, what's the yesod of saying something like that the parents are the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin? It's a Maimer Chazal. The Posuk in Bamidbar, it says, Eile Teldes, Meishe v'Aden, and it goes on to speak about Elazar and Isamar. Elazar and Isamar are not the children of Meishe and Aaron, they're the children of Aaron. So Rashi brings some Medrash, says, and from the Gemara, how could you call them children, Teldes, Meishe and Aaron? So it says, Hamalamad is ben Chaveda Teira Kili Yolde. Someone who teaches his friend's child Teira, Ma'ila Lova Kosa, the Teira considers as if he gave birth to it. Shenantan Levanecha, Ela Talmidim. Teach your children, these are your students. Students are compared to children. Why? Because the teacher implants in them not just biological life, but spiritual life, godly life, Torah life. So there's a value to that. But if someone's going to say that Allah should not have covet to Aaron, they'll say Aaron is not my father, only Moshe. First of all, the Torah says Moshe ve'Aaron. There's a mitzvah kibbud ve'aim. If the chassid, if that's what he meant, I hope that's what he meant. You're saying that you should know that you have biological parents, you have parents who love you and you love them. But then there's a deeper thing, the Rebbe's connection to all of us. As a teacher, as a Rebbe. And that connection may be even deeper. Vardi, it says in Torah, that when it comes to kibbud ve'aim, if your parents tell you to do something that says against what God says, you're not supposed to listen to them. Why? Because they have to also honor God. So it's not just your parents as an end in themselves. But this has to be presented as such in the right context. When it's the right context, the same thing can be said, not only not offending, but actually giving nachas. I remember times when the bochim, my classmates and others would go on shlichus in yeshiva to other yeshivas. So I remember once they were stood in Gan Eden Atachten very often. The Rebbe would give them dollars or whatever it was. The Rebbe would give them bracha. And the Rebbe once said to the parents, "Adank farbrenged the Kinder bizaher, u'vernitzer will ich nehmen auf meine places. Will ich sie nehmen auf meine places." Thank you for bringing your children till here. And from here on, I take them on my shoulders. Those parents came out beaming. Not because they thought the Rebbe was replacing them, God forbid. The biggest nachas, that they brought up children that now can join the Rebbe's army as the Rebbe students, and the Rebbe would take them to another level altogether. It's like saying, I taught you everything I can, and now I'm taking you to the great teacher, the Rebbe. And he will take you to another level. Not a contradiction, but an enhancement of parenting. That's what Chassidishe parents know. So it's vital to keep that message. At the same time, there's also a famous letter where the Rebbe says, it's a long story, but basically a mother didn't want her children to go on shlichus, so the Rebbe writes to the mother, I never thought of a mother caring more about her own good than good of her children. What's greater for her children than shlichus of a Rebbe? And then the Rebbe continues, I thought to myself, how could you build an army if the soldier has to go ask his mother every morning before going to fight? It's a letter in Tavshin Tazayin, in Igros Kedish. In Shmini Tavshin Chai, the Rebbe also speaks about Kibbud Avim is a big mitzvah. But when you have to go Kol HaYetzil Mechamas Beis David is another inyan, and that's not a contradiction to Kibbud Avim, because the Rebbe would never ask you to do something that Chas v'Shalom would be against our parents. But that's based on the explanations I've given here and everything in context. So what to tell those parents? I would explain this to them, that was the kavanah. I would explain it also to the son, because once you understand it, I think it can be resolved pretty easily. And for now, it can just get worse if you don't explain it. Okay. Let's go now to the Chassidus question of the week. Where are we? Let me make sure I covered everything. Yeah. It's a question in Tanya Perek Tezvov, 15, chapter 15. If keeping the 613 mitzvahs is the recipe to make a dirah b'tachtenim, a home for God in His lowest of worlds, you do it through a mitzvah, the mitzvahs that we do in this world, how is it that only a person who struggles is a oved Elokim? Which is, as he explains in chapter 15, that only a person, oved means that he struggles, it can't be done by rote. He says there, someone that is mechanically, or that's his rote or pattern or routine, to learn 100 times, review in the time of the Gemara. There was accustomed to study the same thing 100 times. Sheina Pirkei Mei Pamim. It's a big thing. But since it was the custom, it's not called oved Elokim. It's called Lo Yavodeh, as if he didn't serve. Why? Because Aveda comes from Ibud Eres, from effort. And that one effort, that 101 time, that one time over the 100, has more echazdik, a qualitative power, than the 100 times. So the questioner is asking, dirah b'tachtenim doesn't make this condition. The doing a mitzvah, you do a physical mitzvah. He speaks in Perek Lamed Zayin, and then later with Lamed Ches, Akim mitzvos of Have Maisa, especially Maisa mitzvahs that you do in action. But even mitzvahs in speech or in thought, which all has connected to the physical world, that takes a material world, an unrefined, coarse world, and turns it into a home for the divine. You don't find there the condition that has to be Yigi and Aved. So the answer is several-fold here. First of all, the Alter Rebbe knows what he wrote in Perek Lamed Zayin, Lamed Ches, and about dirah b'tachtenim. He already wrote Perek Tezvav earlier. So it doesn't contradict it. You can do a mitzvah in action, and it becomes something by rote. So that doesn't say it doesn't make any dirah b'tachtenim. But if you do it with Yigiyah, and you can do it with Aveda, it's a much deeper power, much more transformative. That's number one. In other words, you can do a mitzvah without kavanah, or you can do a mitzvah mechanically, you can mitzvah by rote. So you have the dirah b'tachtenim being done, but it's not being done with the same power as Aveda, Avodai, oved Elokim, that it speaks about in Perek Tezvav. That's number one. Number two, even a mitzvah that you do mechanically, this is also an effort. It's very easy not to do mitzvahs. The mere fact that you're taking in the morning, you're putting tefillin on your arm, or you put it up on mezuzah, or you eat kosher. So even if you're doing minimal effort, to say there's no yigiyah, no effort, and that Alter Rebbe Taki uses in Perek Lamed Zayin the expression, Aidei masenu va'avoidosenu. Maisa is Veloshen Kfiyah that Rebbe brings. And Avedosenu, Aveda is Yigiyah. So you see, every mitzvah you do is an element of Maisa and Aveda. Now, however, if it's done with a full explanation, Perek Tezvav, then it has even more power. Because the more effort that goes into it, the more transformative it is, which is obvious. That's the two key things I would answer in this question here. One more thing I'd add is when it says that the mitzvahs are a recipe to dirah b'tachtenim, a part of the reason for that is because they're in the physical world, you're doing God's will. Learning Torah, for example, in Gan Eden doesn't make a dirah b'tachtenim because it's not in this world. Learning Torah in this world does. So the real focus there is because you're working in this world. And as I just said, in this world, everything is a form of work. I may be repeating myself a bit, but I just wanted to add that little footnote as well. Okay. Now let's go to the essays. 3 essays this week. They're all in Hebrew. We had a big showing of Hebrew essays this year, more than usual, more than the past, and reflective in the amounts of essays that came in. So we're going to go with first essay is, let me just see here. Okay. Tools for dealing with the temptations of the internet. Or in Hebrew, Ergas Kelim Lismeidus Mul Pisuye Ha Internet. Translated. That basically, Ergas Kelim, like a tool chest to dealing with the temptations of the internet by Malkie Alperovitch, age 22, Migdal, Haemek, Israel. She's a moira, a teacher in Beis Chaya Mushka in Kiryat Shmuel. This essay is well done, well worth reading because we all face the challenges of the internet today. And begins with an introduction, a very clear introduction that a while back, before technology burst open as it has now, if a person from, let's say, Bnei Brak wanted to go see a movie, there were several ways to do this. They had to find an excuse to leave the house that nobody should know where they're going. They had to find money to go with a bus and find this theater and buy a ticket for that. They had to stand outside and hide themselves and no one should see them. And after all the pleasure they got, they had to come back in a secret way, make sure with some excuse that nobody understood, catches where they went. Today, all that's gone. I only spelled it out because she spelled it out. It's all gone. Today, you have it right in your mobile phone. So more important than ever to find a solution. So Chassidus, she writes, teaches us that God who runs the world and created the world, created also technology and definitely gave us the ability to counter and preempt these challenges. And goes on to lay it out in a few steps. The first thing is the challenge that God places in our lives. There's a classic example brought in Tanya from Zayar, the challenge of a king who hires someone to tempt his son. And there's an intention to bring out the deeper strengths. So today we have to require the contemplation on that element. Second part she talks about, but why does it have to be so difficult? And the answer briefly is because God wanted us the best, to give us the best. To give us the best, we have to be challenged in the deepest way possible, which brings out the best in a person. That's how we excel. And the third section is the solution. One of the solutions is how you say to the temptation, please, I'm busy with something else. I'll be back with you. And brings a bunch of answers from the Rebbe in that regard. In a very, I would say, elegant and structured way, explains the process of dealing with this, and then actually put up a bunch of rules to hang up on your refrigerator, as she suggests it, with a whole bunch of list of suggestions, which you can see this essay and all the others that I'm going to be doing, and all the new ones posted at meaningfullife.com/mylife. If you also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you get very interesting new material that we post all the time. We also send out these new essays as they are posted. That's essay number 1. And I leave you looking up and seeing the different suggestions that are made to deal with this. Essay number 2 is freeing oneself from depression and the path to joy according to Chassidus. In Hebrew, Menachem, Feldman, age 32, Israel, Magid Shir in Yeshivas Lubavitch of Dnepr, Ukraine. Dnepropetrovsk, Ukraine. Okay, it's another Hebrew essay, and this essay is, as the name implies, is dealing with the issue. One of the big issues that people face, society faces today, is depression, and the different secular approaches to it. But here goes the Chassidic approach that looks at it in a very fundamentally different way. Not just how to free ourselves from it, but how to transform depression to a positive force and motivational force that brings us joy and energy. Goes on to describe, first of all, the problem in detail. The Chassidus from Perek Chav Tes, and how the Rebbe explains it in Perek Chav Tes, and the whole approach to taking this. that even then understanding it's one of the challenges given to weaken us, even when we can't face, when we don't know, when we that doesn't help us to deal with the depression, to realize that the depressed state brings you to a cheshbon nefesh, because it's a good time for introspection. And then with a very practical conclusion of a bunch of steps as well, as the essays was required to give you bullet points or steps, how to actually deal with this challenge. Well done as well. And finally, essay number 3, a physical body versus a divine soul. Guf Gashmi Mul Nishma Neshama Elokit. This is by Menachem Mendel Vardi, age 16. Yerushalayim, Israel, studying in Tomchei Tmimim Beitar Ilit. It's a short essay, but basically how to reconcile between these two great forces and how to live spiritual life throughout your physical life that we live through. Taking Tanya, classic Tanya, in the first early Prokim, Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Abamis, divine soul, animal soul. And I enjoyed how he posed it, even though I wouldn't say there's something radically fresh and new here, but it's definitely seen a 16-year-old applying that and bringing in the potatoes, Abba Shem Tov Kisir Chamer Reyacha, using your body not to ignore your body or deprive it, but actually to transform it. And then comes into a practical way how this applies itself in life, in the different things that what will happen when the body gets strong and the soul does not direct it, how a person loses self-confidence, a person becomes lazy, becomes confused and bitter and sad, the worries, parnasa worries, livelihood worries, and then ultimately how to take care and transform yourself into a position where you can counter all those negative forces. Again, well done. Thank you so much. And with that, my friends, we will conclude this Shivasa B'Tamas Nidche program, episode 219. As we conclude this day, may it be transformed into a holiday, into joy, revealing the inner meaning of it all, as I discussed at the beginning of the program, and that the 3 weeks, Bein HaMitzorim, can be transformed into 3 weeks of Simcha with the Geula Amitis Vashlema. Every Sunday we're here from 8 to 9 p.m. Please share this with your friends. As I said, you can access all the previous programs at meaningfullife.com/mylife. And it's also time-stamped. You can find the subject you're looking for. And please also be generous in helping sponsor a program or series of programs. Thank you very much, and everyone have a blessed week, a simcha dika week. Yehavchi yomel l'sasnu l'simcha l'meyedim tevim.